I've been a code enforcement official for over a decade. It's not the most glamorous job in the world, but it keeps people safe. I'm responsible for making sure new buildings are in compliance with building codes and zoning regulations. I've seen my fair share of strange things, but nothing could have prepared me for what I found in the attic of that 3-story home a couple of years ago. It was a routine inspection. The house was under construction. It wasn't too far from the wetlands, and that fact definitely played a key role in what unfolded. I'd already checked the main floors. Everything was up to code, no major issues. But when I climbed up to the attic, I immediately felt something was odd. It had nothing to do with code violations or any of that stuff. It was something else. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I guess if I had to boil it down, I'd say I immediately felt like I wasn't alone up there, even though there was no one else in sight. The air was thick and musty, and the space was mostly pretty dark. There was a tiny attic window letting in some light, but it didn't do much. I flicked on my flashlight. And holy moly, that's when I saw it. I was 100% sure it was a stuffed animal. Some kind of bizarre knick-knack. Some sort of weird novelty item or gag gift. An alligator stretched out on the floor in all its scaly glory. 8 feet long, if I had to guess. I chuckled to myself, thinking how strange it was to find something like that in an attic. I thought maybe one of the contractors had gotten it as a prank and was hiding it in the attic before planting it downstairs to scare the bejesus out of his co-workers. But then I took a step closer, and whoa, that's when I saw its eyes. 2 glowing orbs reflecting the light back at me. My heart stopped. This was an animal, but it wasn't stuffed. This alligator was very much alive. I froze, my flashlight trembling in my hand. I'd come across gators before, but never this close, and never in such a tight space. The gator didn't move, but its eyes stayed locked on me, unblinking. I realized then how close I'd been to disaster. I was about 2 feet away from stepping on its head. 2 feet away from provoking an 8-foot-long predator in an enclosed space. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. How the hell did an alligator end up in an attic? And how long had it been there? The questions swirled in my head, but I didn't have time to answer them. I needed to get out of there, fast. I scooted out of the attic as quickly as my feet would take me. Then I called animal control as soon as I was back on solid ground, my hands still shaking. They arrived in a hurry, and even they were stunned by what they found. It took a team of professionals to safely remove the gator from the attic. There were mud trails in the house made by the gator. Like I said, the house was under construction, and the contractors would often leave 1 or more doors open. With wetlands nearby, gators were a common sight in the area. And an open door provided a perfect opportunity for this 8-foot predator to steal inside and make himself at home. You'd never guess by looking at those short legs, but alligators are actually good climbers. Stairs, fences, trees, you name it. That's one skill that makes them even more terrifying. The good news is, though they're capable of climbing, most of them never do. To this day, I can't shake the image of those glowing eyes staring back at me in the darkness. I've inspected hundreds of attics since then, and every time I climb up that ladder, I can't help but wonder what else might be lurking in the shadows. That gator taught me one thing. No matter how routine the job seems, you never know what terrors you could find. I've always had a thing about reptiles. Lizards, snakes, alligators, they send a shiver down my spine. It's not just a dislike, it's a full-blown phobia. So, when I got promoted at work and found out I'd have to move from the East Coast to Florida, I was both thrilled and terrified. The promotion was a big deal, a chance to move up in the company I'd been with for years. But Florida? Land of swamps, humidity, and of course, alligators? I wasn't exactly stoked about the idea of sharing space with those prehistoric nightmares. Still, the opportunity was too good to pass up. I found a nice townhouse near a canal. It was bigger and nicer than my old place, and surprisingly affordable. Though I'd heard that was changing fast in Florida. The place had everything I needed. Modern appliances, a spacious layout, and a view of the water. But that view came with a price. Before I moved in, I didn't really associate canals with gators. I thought gators lived in swamps, but it turns out they also like canals, even ones in areas that are pretty urban like the neighborhood I lived in. So it wasn't long before I had my first gator sighting in the canal. They'd sunbathe on the banks or glide through the water like silent predators. Every time I saw one, a knot of fear tightened in my stomach. I started avoiding the outdoors as much as possible. I kept my doors and windows tightly locked, even in the middle of the day. Maybe that seemed a little paranoid, but better safe than sorry. One night, I was upstairs watching TV when I heard a loud crash from downstairs. At first, I thought it was part of the show, some dramatic sound effect, but then I realized the noise was real. My heart started racing. What could it be? A burglar? A raccoon? My mind raced through the possibilities as I grabbed my phone and cautiously made my way downstairs. The living room was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. I flipped on the lights and froze. The sliding glass door was shattered, shards of glass scattered across the floor. My first thought was that someone had broken in, but then I saw it. A massive alligator, at least 12 feet long, was waddling through my living room. I couldn't move. My breath caught in my throat as the gator turned its head, its cold, reptilian eyes locking onto mine. It was like something out of a nightmare. The creature's tail swung lazily, knocking over a lamp and sending it crashing to the floor. The sound snapped me out of my daze. I backed away slowly, my hands trembling as I dialed animal control. "There's an alligator in my living room," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. The dispatcher assured me they'd send someone right away, but it felt like an eternity before they arrived. I stayed upstairs, peeking over the railing to keep an eye on the gator. It didn't seem aggressive, just curious, exploring its new surroundings like it owned the place. But every time it moved, my heart skipped a beat. When animal control finally arrived, they were calm and professional, like this was just another day on the job. They managed to wrangle the gator and haul it out of my house, leaving me to deal with the aftermath. The next few days were a blur. I had the sliding door replaced with something sturdier, but no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in my own home. That gator taught me something about fear. It's not always rational, but it's always real. And sometimes, no matter how much you try to avoid the things that scare you, they have a way of finding you anyway. I still live in that townhouse, but I've never quite gotten used to the sight of the canal. Every time I see a gator sunbathing on the bank, I can't help but wonder if it's the same one that paid me a visit that night. And every time I hear a strange noise downstairs, I grab my phone and brace myself for the worst. Because in Florida, you never know what might come crashing through your door. Easter morning was supposed to be peaceful. A day for family, for gratitude, for watching my infant daughter, Lily, giggle as she discovered the colorful eggs we'd hidden around the house. But instead, it turned into a nightmare I'll never forget. It started with a noise. I was in the kitchen brewing coffee when I heard it. A loud thud, followed by the sound of something heavy dragging across the floor. My first thought was that my wife, Sarah, was up early, rearranging furniture on the enclosed porch. But when I peeked into the living room, there was no sign of her. The only person nearby was Lily. I usually brought her crib out into the living room so I could keep an eye on her. The noise came again, louder this time. My heart pounded in my chest. I crept toward the porch, my mind racing through possibilities. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. There, on our porch, was a massive alligator. It had to be at least 9 feet long, its scaly body glistening in the early morning light. The screen door was torn open, and the gator was lumbering around the porch, knocking over chairs. Its tail sent a potted plant crashing to the floor. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. How the hell did a gator get up here? We live in a raised house with a 15-foot staircase leading up to the porch. There's no way it could have climbed that high. And yet there it was staring at me with those reptilian eyes. My mind raced to Lily. She was just a few feet away, sleeping soundly, completely unaware of the danger lurking on the other side of the door. If that gator got inside, I couldn't even finish the thought. I slowly slid Lily's crib back into the kitchen, not making any sudden movements, trembling slightly from the shock and fear. Then I dialed the Department of Natural Resources. "There's an alligator on my porch," I whispered, trying to keep my voice calm. "It's huge, and it's right outside my house. Please, you have to get here fast." The dispatcher assured me they'd send someone, but it felt like an eternity before I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. In the meantime, I kept watch, my eyes glued to the gator as it continued to wreak havoc on the porch. Every time it moved, my heart skipped a beat. When the wildlife expert finally arrived, he wrangled the gator and hauled it away, but not before explaining that it was likely an older gator, maybe 60 years old, trying to find its way back to a breeding pond. A recent fence installation had blocked its usual path, and our porch was just an unfortunate detour. As I watched the gator being loaded into the truck, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my chest. What if it had gotten inside? What if it had hurt Lily? The thought made me sick to my stomach. We spent the rest of the day cleaning up the porch and reinforcing the screen door, but no amount of repairs could erase the memory of those beady eyes boring into me. Now, every time I hear a strange noise outside, I grab a flashlight and brace myself for the worst. And every time I look at Lily, I'm reminded of how close we came to disaster. That gator wasn't just a threat to our property, it was a threat to our family, and that's something I'll never forget.